Untold story of Joseph R. Beyrl. What if I told you that one American soldier parachuted into Nazi-occupied France, was captured twice, tortured by the Gestapo, escaped 3 times, fought alongside the Soviet Red Army, and was declared dead, only to walk into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow like a ghost with a lucky strike? How does a kid from Michigan end up commanding explosives in a Soviet tank battalion? Why did Marshal Zhukov personally intervene in his case? And what happened when he returned home to find his funeral had already been held? This isn't fiction. This is the unbelievable, bullet-dodging, tank-riding, cigarette-lit true story of Joseph R. Beyrl, the only American soldier known to fight for both the U.S. Army and the Soviet Red Army in World War II. From Normandy to Berlin, from POW camps to pontoon bridges, this is a tale of grit, guts, and the kind of luck that makes history blink twice. So grab your helmet, light a metaphorical lucky strike, and buckle up, because this story will leave you asking, how did he survive? Why did he fight? And what does it mean to come back from the dead? It all began in the industrial heartbeat of Muskegon, Michigan, on August 25, 1923. Joe was the second of 7 kids in a German-speaking Catholic blue-collar family. His dad worked the foundry, his mom ran the house like a general with a wooden spoon. Joe grew up tough, fast, and allergic to losing. He played 4 sports in high school: football, baseball, basketball, and track, and earned a scholarship to Notre Dame. But then came December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And Joe, like a true American action figure, said, "Screw the scholarship, I want to jump out of planes." On September 17, 1942, at just 19, Joe joined the Army and was selected for the 5th or 6th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Destination: Camp Toccoa, Georgia. If hell had a gym, it would be Toccoa. The men ran up and down Currahee Mountain like caffeinated mountain goats. Joe crushed a 162-mile march in 72 hours, a record that still stands. He became a radio operator in Easy Company, then headed to Fort Benning for jump school, where he earned his nickname. He was so fearless, other soldiers paid him to make their jumps. Joe took the cash and invested in lucky strikes, because in Europe, cigarettes were more valuable than gold. After demolition school and training with the Brits, where he earned British paratrooper wings, Joe volunteered for a covert mission, parachuting into Nazi-occupied France with a satchel of gold to fund the French resistance. He did it twice. Delivered the gold, made it back. No big deal, just another Tuesday for Jumping Joe. Then came D-Day, June 6, 1944. Joe hooked into a C-47 and braced for chaos. His plane took hits, stalled, and he jumped at just 400 feet, basically nosediving into a church roof in St. Mary Église. He slid off, found no friendlies, and went full Rambo. Blew up 2 substations, tossed grenades at a German patrol. But after 20 hours of crawling through hedgerows, he ran into a machine gun nest and surrendered. The Germans dragged him to HQ, where a mysterious blonde woman tried to play mind games, claiming she danced with his unit in Ramsbury. Joe wasn't buying it. He stuck to the basics: name, rank, serial number. Later, while marching toward Carentan, American artillery lit up the column. Joe caught shrapnel, helped 2 wounded GIs, flagged down a German patrol to save them, then slipped away into the night. He was recaptured the next day. Loaded onto a truck to St. Lo, the convoy was strafed by American aircraft. Joe dove for cover and somehow survived. When they reached the city, it was already burning. He was tossed into a horse stable. That night, U.S. bombers flattened St. Lo. The stable and a nearby church were the only things left standing. Joe survived. Again. Next stop, a monastery outside Tessy-sur-Vire, nicknamed Starvation Hill. Food was a rumor. Sanitation was a myth. Then came the SS. They interrogated Joe for 20-plus hours a day. Why would a German-American fight for Roosevelt? Are you Jewish? Are you a traitor? Joe, never one to mince words, called an officer a son of a foof. He woke up days later in a hospital with his skull caved in. Joe was moved again, Alençon, Chartres, Paris, then stuffed into a boxcar with 80 men in a 40 by 8 feet space for 7 days. On day 2, Allied aircraft strafed the train. 10 men died. Dozens were wounded. Eventually they arrived at Stalag 12th A in Limburg. After a 5-mile march, Joe was processed, shaved, showered, and tagged. Prisoner 12A8213. A week later, he was moved to Stalag 4B, then to Stalag 3C in Poland. This camp was a nightmare. 10,000 Russian POWs, including women and a few hundred Americans. Joe helped organize escape teams and security units. When escape plans kept failing, they discovered a German spy planted during transfer. The POWs held a court-martial. Verdict: guilty. Sentence: execution. They dismembered the spy and dumped him down the latrines. Brutal, but effective. With the spy gone, security improved. Red Cross parcels trickled in. Canned meat, chocolate, and cigarettes became survival tools. One night, Joe hit the jackpot. Won 60 packs in a dice game. Enough to try something bold. He and 2 other POWs approached a German guard. Offered 10 packs. 5 now, 5 later. The bribe worked. The gate opened. And on January 10, 1945, the 3 Americans made a break for it. It was November 1944. Cold enough to make your bones file a formal complaint. Joe and 2 fellow POWs had bribed a German guard with lucky strikes, because in wartime Europe, cigarettes were basically Bitcoin. The guard looked the other way, and like ghosts in the fog, they slipped through the wire. They trekked a mile through the dark to a freight line, waiting for the 10 p.m. train like it was their Uber to freedom. Steel on steel, here it came. They leapt into an open car, hearts pounding, dreams of Poland dancing in their heads. But the intel was garbage. The train didn't go east. It veered northwest, straight into Berlin. That's like trying to escape Alcatraz and ending up in the warden's office. By dawn, they were smack in the middle of an active rail yard, bombers overhead. No cover, no exit, just the sound of death on wings. Then they spotted an older German man inspecting train wheels. Joe, ever the diplomat, approached with caution and a pack of smokes. "We're escaped POWs," he said. "Got anything edible that doesn't taste like despair?" The man agreed. That night, he returned with bread, sausage, beer, and a promise. He'd bring a wagon and get them out. And he did. They were taken to a house on the edge of the city, greeted by civilians with the kind of quiet stares that say, "We're either going to help you or sell you out for a bottle of schnapps." Joe's gut said something was off, and Joe's gut was rarely wrong. The next morning, boots, shouting, gunfire. 5 plainclothes Gestapo agents stormed the basement like they were auditioning for the role of worst house guests ever. No questions, no warnings, just fists, boots, and Luger butts. They hung Joe and the others by their wrists, stomped them, kicked them, clubbed them. When they passed out, the Gestapo started over. It was less interrogation and more medieval torture with a Nazi twist. Then, miracle. German army officers burst in, furious. "These POWs aren't yours," they shouted. "They belong to the Wehrmacht." A screaming match ensued. The Gestapo reluctantly handed them over. Joe was sent to Stalag Luft 3, the same camp made famous by the Great Escape. He was half dead, ribs cracked, face mangled, but alive. A week later, they dragged him back to Stalag 3C and tossed him into the box, a coffin-sized cell buried in snow. No heat, no insulation, just a ragged coat, a crust of black bread, and the kind of cold that makes your soul consider early retirement. Joe survived by pacing, staying awake, refusing to quit. A week in, a Red Cross inspector from Geneva found him barely standing. "This man's a popsicle," he probably said. Joe was released, limping, frostbitten, but head held high. And just like that, he started planning again. January 1945. The Red Army was roaring through Poland, just 50 miles away. Morale surged. Hidden radios confirmed it. Liberation was coming. But Joe wasn't the type to wait for rescue. He staged a fake medical emergency. A prisoner faked a seizure. Joe and Brewer ran in with a stretcher, loaded him up, and convinced the guards they needed to reach the dispensary. Schultz, the grumpy old ferret-faced guard, waved them through. At the second gate, chaos erupted behind them. A staged brawl. Diversion successful. They ditched the stretcher, sprinted into the woods, and leapt into a passing farm wagon loaded with 3 massive barrels of root vegetables. It rolled past the final guard post like a miracle on wheels, until it hit a rock. The wagon flipped, barrels shattered, POWs exposed, gunfire erupted from the tower. 2 were cut down instantly. Joe ran, dove into a freezing river, hugged the muddy bank as German shepherds sniffed the air. The icy water masked his scent. For 3 days, Joe moved only at night, hiding in barns, lofts, anything with 4 walls and a roof. Every day, the artillery got closer. The Red Army was nearly on top of him. On the 3rd night, half-starved and frozen, he passed out in a hayloft. At dawn, he woke to the rumble of tanks. Russians shouting. Joe stumbled out to the road, lit a damp Lucky Strike with shaking hands, and yelled the only Russian he knew, "Amerikansky tovarish, American friend." A hatch creaked open. Out stepped a Soviet tank commander. Not just any commander. Alexandra Grigory Samusenko, one of the few female officers in the Red Army. She was tough as nails, the only woman to command a tank battalion, and she wasn't there to play nice. She looked at Joe, soaked, freezing, cigarette dangling from his lips like a war-weary cowboy, and he looked back at her and said, "I want to kill Nazis." When Joe staggered out of that barn, soaked and half dead, and shouted "Amerikansky tovarish" to a Soviet tank battalion, he wasn't just asking for help. He was auditioning for a role in the Red Army. And Commander Alexandra Grigorievna Samosenko, the only female tank battalion commander in the Soviet military, was the casting director. She looked at this mud-caked American paratrooper, cigarette dangling from his lips, eyes blazing with vengeance, and asked herself, do I shoot him, salute him, or hand him a submachine gun? Joe didn't flinch. "I want to fight. I want to get to Berlin, and I want to kill Nazis." Samosenko smirked, huddled with her political officer, then handed him a PPSH-41, the Soviet answer to, "Let's make this guy a walking blender of bullets." She pointed west. Just like that, Joe Beyrl became the only American soldier known to fight for both the U.S. Army and the Soviet Red Army in World War II. Joe spent the next several weeks riding 4 tanks back from the front line, plowing through German roadblocks like a hot knife through fascist butter. He was part of a Soviet Sherman column. Yes, American tanks, gifted to the Soviets through Lend-Lease, now ironically carrying an American who'd been declared dead. A few days in, they encountered a column of POWs being marched out of Stalag 3C. A firefight erupted. Guards were killed. Tragically, so were some American prisoners caught in the crossfire. Samosenko, furious and protective of her accidental American, ordered the column north to avoid further incidents. Eventually, they circled back to Joe's old prison. Some POWs had refused to evacuate and were still hiding in the barracks. The Soviets took the camp with barely a fight. Joe was brought to the command office, where he found a safe and a pile of U.S. nitro-starch explosives the Soviets didn't know how to use. Joe knew exactly what to do. He wired it up, blew the safe wide open, and watched the Russians scoop up watches, gold, and currency like kids at a candy store. Joe grabbed his POW record, photo ID, and a satchel packed with invasion dollars, British pounds, and French francs. He tied it to the back of the tank and kept moving west. Not long after, the column rolled out of a defensive position when the sky screamed. Stuka dive bombers, the Luftwaffe's flying banshees, descended like angry hornets. Bombs fell. Joe dove for cover but wasn't fast enough. He blacked out. When he woke, a Soviet medic was crouched over him, pulling shrapnel from his upper thigh near the groin. No morphine, no English. Just pain and the awkward realization that he'd nearly been neutered by a Nazi. He was moved to a Soviet field hospital near the Polish border, battling fever and infection. Weak, wounded, and still somehow alive, Joe began plotting his next move. Head west, find the front, and reconnect with American forces. Then one day, the hospital went silent. Officers snapped to attention. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, commander of the entire Red Army, walked in like a war god inspecting his temple. Zhukov stopped at Joe's bed. Through a translator, he asked how Joe was feeling, where he'd been wounded, and what unit he'd served with. Joe told him everything. Normandy, capture, escape, tank battalion. Zhukov listened, nodded, gave quiet instructions, and left. 2 days later, Joe was handed a letter written in Russian. It identified him as an American paratrooper and requested safe passage to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. Joe boarded a hospital train north, passing through Łódź, then the ruins of Warsaw, where a Polish civilian helped him find a Catholic convent. The nuns cleaned his wounds, fed him hot soup, and helped him cross the Vistula River on a pontoon bridge. From there, he made his way to Rembertov, then boarded another train bound for Moscow. At the edge of the city, a Soviet colonel met him and personally escorted him into town via subway. Together, they rode to the U.S. Embassy inside the National Hotel, just off Red Square. Joe was finally back in American hands. They gave him clean clothes, a hot meal, and a cot. But that night, a U.S. Marine stood guard outside his room. Joe asked why. The Marine replied, "Because you're dead." According to U.S. Army records, Joseph R. Beyrl had been declared killed in action on June 10, 1944, just 4 days after D-Day. His parents had received the telegram. The War Department had filed the paperwork. A funeral mass had even been held in his hometown in Michigan. To the U.S. government, Joe no longer existed. He immediately requested to be fingerprinted and asked them to verify his identity with Fort Benning or Camp Toccoa. Until then, he was confined to the hotel, treated with suspicion, and guarded like a Cold War thriller character. Eventually, the fingerprints came back. The results confirmed it. Joe Beyrl was exactly who he claimed to be. On April 21, 1945, Joe finally made it home to Michigan. 2 weeks later, he celebrated VE Day in Chicago, probably with a beer in one hand and a Lucky Strike in the other. In 1946, he married Joanne Hollowell in the same church and by the same priest who had held his funeral mass 2 years earlier. Talk about resurrection. If you stayed to the end of this wild ride through history with Jumping Joe Beyrl, you are appreciated. As we bring you more captivating stories, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another jaw-dropping story of grit, glory, and the kind of madness that makes legends. We've got more tales coming that'll make your history teacher jealous. So stay tuned, stay curious, and stay subscribed.